Hi again, Nia, and let's break down more of your animations. So we have this wonderful explosion animation, and as I said before, uh, it's great. It's looking really good. I really like the motion. It has some nice variety. It has some great rotation. So the things that we can push here are again mostly connected to design and minor tweaks of motion here and there. So the first thing that we can uh, talk about is pushing the difference, as we always have to, between a couple masses. So you see these two masses. I think if we look at the overall composition in terms of the negative shapes and in terms of the positive shapes that we have here, or just particles, I think we're getting a bit even at the end. You can see that these holes, they're quite similar in size. So we can push the contrast between them. We can make maybe a bigger shape here and let it erase more, and then we'll make the difference between these two particles more significant, and this will help us push our design. So let's see. So I see that this part was a smaller mass and this was a leading bigger mass. So I would probably push it. It would probably be easier to push it in a way that this stays smaller and this stays bigger. Though, of course, we can switch the roles. It would just require a bit more work. So let's try this. And I'll keep this almost as it is. Maybe just a tiny bit of extra mass here and there. And now I'll push this particle down. Maybe add some small variation. And I'll decrease the size. So we can clearly see the difference between them. And now the third shape, I think we can also try to push the difference. Maybe there is a small shape here that creates a counter motion. Let's see. Okay, so we'll push some kind of small shape here and make sure that the left and the right side of this particle stays different. So again, this is small stuff, really small stuff, but when it accumulates over the course of the animation, it really makes a difference design-wise and visually. So this kind of small changes is what we learn to do slowly as we gradually learn more and more about FX and our design skills. So now we can push the difference between this. So we can push the variation here, maybe by dividing it into two masses more clearly. So the mass on the top and at the bottom. And here we can push the variety in particles. Maybe some of them keep their shape and some of them become these thin lines. And maybe we get a bit of variation between the groups. So again, really small stuff. Okay, so now let's go and see what else we can do. So I think when it breaks up into particles at the end, you see, again, everything's connected, and then it gets cut in half. And that's what makes it a bit tricky and a bit less interesting design-wise. I would keep one of the sides connected in this case to keep the more interesting design of the shape. And here the same thing, so we get three particles of the same size, so we can combine one of them and keep one of them kind of cut. here we can push the variation in width, really focus on the shape language. Again, really small stuff. So now let's look here. So again, overall, pretty nice. I like the variation, I like the difference in mask sizes. So we can probably push scenes here and there, but the general idea and the general motion is really, really nice. So we had to push something here. I would probably create even bigger delay between these holes or negative shapes. You see, they have a noticeable delay at the start, and this is nice. They appear with one frame delay, which is also not bad. But then what we get here is that they at some point start going almost following each other. So I think we could delay one of them even more to create a more interesting sense of erasing the shape. So after this frame, you see there is delay, and then on these frames, it feels like they're going too similar. So we can delay them more. So one delayed, the other one can go as is. And this will help us with the composition as well. The other thing that we can push is the difference between these two shapes. So you see they're quite similar, or rather they create quite similar curves here. So we can change things up and make sure that they're different. Same thing here. So we can push the difference even more between these two. And then we'll get a more interesting composition here. So again, it's small stuff for the most part. So next, let's talk about this tricky shading thing. So let's focus on this effect for now. On the effect when they explode and we have this shading. So I think what you did is okay, and it's looking nice overall. So the tricky thing here is that we need to simplify stuff, but also keep it interesting. So we have these couple frames, and then right here, so it looks fine. What I immediately notice is that we need to push the variation in these shapes. So you see we have these 4 shapes, and they're all grouped in one area. So all of them are in one area, and they have roughly the same sizes and roughly the same shape. And that's why it feels a bit strange. So it's not bad or good or bad, it's just, it will feel a bit strange to have a group of similar shapes in one area and then a group of bigger shapes in a different area. So for example, we have this group of particles here, and then we have a group of bigger particles a bit higher. And what I would say here is that the best thing is probably to combine stuff and make it more connected rather than separating everything so much. So if I zoom out, if I zoom out, it's nice. So, oh, I know how to say it. So when we're thinking about adding extra colors and adding extra layers to the animation, what we should be thinking about is structure. So usually there is a main color. So main color may not be the first color that we draw with, it can be the second color. So what does main color do? Main color is like the canvas essentially. It's the color that takes the biggest amount of space on the animation. So, and it can change those animation. So for example, here, the main color is this one. And if we take it and fill all the zones that it takes, it will probably take like 70-60% of the entire volume of the animation. And this value can shift, but what we don't want is it to be equal to other color. Then we have the second color, for example, the shadow color, and it takes like 15% of the animation. Then we have like orange color, and it takes like 10% of the animation. And then we have like white color, and it takes the remaining 5% of the animation. So with each color, the areas that it takes, or the areas that it takes in specific part of the effects, decreases. So it kind of creates this level of hierarchy and structure. And I think what we're getting here is that things are getting a bit tricky, because the gray color, the dark gray color, and the black color, and the light gray color, they all take right about the same amount of space, and they start to fight each other. So that's the kind of the tricky thing about using too many shades and colors, because you can't just add colors and make them work by default. You have to make sure that each color that you add plays into the existing shape and form and the ratio. So if I had an effect like that, so for example, this is a base color. And then we'll talk about shading, because it's also tricky. So this is a base color. So I take it, and then I add the this color, the light gray color. And I'm like, okay, so I want it to feel volumetric. I want to make sure that my shapes are interesting. I'm creating enough contrast, and I'm emphasizing the shape. So this is too repetitive. Maybe I'll break it up a bit. Okay, so small, medium, big. Okay, now I have something in the center, and we'll put it slightly off center to make it more interesting. So it's not perfectly in the center of the shape. We can use your idea and put it even lower to the right. And we can approach this shading differently. We can use more logical approach based on actual light source position, or we can just go with abstract shapes that define volume, kind of like graphic design of sorts. So again, pushing the variation, so the top ellipse would be bigger, the bottom one would be smaller, and the right one would be even smaller. We can add some smaller shape here to push the contrast between them. Maybe we can push the shape language a bit. Okay, maybe something like this. Then we are adding this shape here, and we are pushing the contrast to make sure that it doesn't exactly feel the same as this shape here, or this shape here, or this shape here. So we want it to feel distinct and to stand up for itself. And then this shape again should also be different enough, and we can combine it with this shape to create more of a sense of unity, rather than making things too separated. So we created a group of light particles, and we can finish this group off with something on this part, on this edge, so it doesn't feel too empty here. Questionable, but let's leave it like that, I guess. Oh no. Tiny fixes here and there. Okay, let's leave it like this. Now over here on this edge, we also need to make sure it's group interested in an interesting way and that it defines volume. I'll give it more directional look here. Let's see, maybe it shows some of the edge here. And we have quite a couple of questions to answer here. Like, how do we want to make sure that our groups are different and interesting? Because right now, one of the things that we can struggle with is compositional relationships between these groups of light and shadow. So if we look here, so our groups of light and shadow are pretty similar to each other in size. So we don't have enough variation between the groups. So I need to make sure that these groups here, when I work with it, that they feel distinct, but also different enough in terms of the space that they take. So maybe some of the groups can be much larger, some groups can be much smaller, so that we still keep the variation. Let's try it. Not sure if it's gonna work out with the same thing, but let's figure it out. Oh, maybe we can here it is. Maybe let's look at these options here. Okay, so here the edges are pretty much fully filled with gray. So let's try that out. And again, it's just a suggestion. Okay. This may be something. It may work out. Now we need to push the variation here in this area as well. And if we want to have this bubbly kind of smoke, we need to define this kind of elliptical shapes. And maybe let's unify the shapes here as well. Just a tiny bit. Still keeping in mind the variation. And this is a point where I can't really talk much when I'm designing, because if it's something that actually takes a lot of my brain power, I just can't do two things at once. So what I've chosen is that I've chosen to simplify it into three major areas. And our two major areas are this one and this one. So if we look at it composition wise, this kind of is a bit bigger, this is a bit smaller. If we look at the areas themselves, we can see this one and this one can be structured like a bigger area, while this one serves as the biggest area. We can definitely still push the ratios between these parts, but I think it works a tiny bit better in terms of the readability. Now, why did I point this like this? So right now with this ellipsis, I'm emphasizing the surface like this. And with these parts, I'm emphasizing the directionality of the motion, making them a bit more different in width and size than over here. So here they're pretty similar. Here I try to push them a bit. Here I made sure that we have a clear compositional big shape, a medium shape, smaller shapes to complement it. So here we have three shapes of similar size surrounded the shape here, and we break it up even more with these internal shapes, which I would again try to simplify and try to make them more clear. So for example, if I add another layer on top of already existing one, I probably wouldn't want to break it up so much. I'll keep them grouped as well. So I'll choose the general direction, so maybe top or bottom. And I choose, okay, so I don't want this layer to take over. This is just like a small focus detail. So I can choose to either make it like an edge light, kind of scene emphasizing the light is hitting from a certain direction, and which direction are we talking about? Or I can do some internal shapes with it. So right now I'm using it as a way to emphasize the already existing shapes as a small, really thin light layer that shouldn't overtake the composition too much. Again, keeping all of the stuff about variation. Making sure that it doesn't mess up my shape and doesn't make them more symmetrical or more similar. Okay, maybe something like this. Now when I add this dark layer, the really, really dark layer, I will only add it in places of the, like when two forms meet each other. Because this is the darkest dark. And again, it shouldn't be too too heavy. It shouldn't overtake the form. So we'll only add it in really tiny spots. Okay, it's so dark that we don't see it. Then I won't add it. Now we have this layer. And again, I'll try to think about the variation. So right here, it's pretty nice, but we don't have much variation in the width in some areas. So I would try to break up this perfect circle that it creates and maybe push it to create something more interesting shape-wise. So it defines the shape. So maybe put it here and there, only where I want to emphasize the form even more. So it's kind of the missing part of the form that help us read the form even better, where we don't have as much information about the form. Again, pushing it to the point where it's not too much and it doesn't become the focus, and it doesn't fight with other layers of detail. So in terms of importance and the visual presence, I would say our current structure is the light gray layer is the biggest one. Then we have the dark layer, then we have the light layer, and then we have this red layer. And the yellow layer, I will only add it in some points here and there, only in the biggest red shapes. I won't add it throughout all the red shapes, because otherwise it will fight with the red layer. So I'll maintain the structure to make sure that it really doesn't mess up everything else. Okay, something like this, maybe. Now, no. Now, if you want to add this gray layer, another gray layer, I would try to make sure that it doesn't feel too even, like it doesn't evenly fill our animation, our effect, and only add it here and there. Okay, so maybe it takes, and then visually I would use it as the new main layer and use this remains of this dark layer as like the shadow between the intersections of the form to keep things clear. So we only see the darkest darks where the forms meet. And of course, it is far from being a perfect concept or a perfect example. But I think the general idea here and the general lesson here is that when we add stuff, it's really not about adding more detail or adding more visually. It's more about adding scenes to make scenes more clear rather than adding scenes to make scenes super complex. So with each layer that we add, we define the form and shape the more clearly and more clearly and more clearly. So essentially each layer gives us more information about the form. And so we should understand it better instead of making it more cluttered, which is really easy to mess up. So that's why I would usually advise not to use too many layers, at least at the start. And then as you get more comfortable with it, you can get pretty detailed and add more stuff. So visual unity rather than visual complexity. So the same scene with this kind of smoke here. So we see a lot of stuff, but it's not grouped well. So we see we have a lot of similar groups, but we don't have big groups. So right here we are working with big groups of shapes and forms. And here everything is like fully separated. It does not interact much. And that's why, yeah, it's really, really tricky. Okay, so what else? So here, again, we can make sure that our forms are grouped. So right now they're all separated. So instead of doing that, I would probably group the forms to a couple big and small areas and work with that. Push the variety between the shapes. One bigger, one smaller. And define, okay, so here is a group of light in this area. Here is a small group. Okay, maybe not like this. We need to make sure that they're different enough. So maybe there is one group of light here and a small particle breaking it up. And then we have a second group of light here. Again, different enough to make them distinct. Or we can do, okay, so there is a bigger, much bigger, more clear group of light here on this edge. And then there is a group of light here. And maybe there is a small group of light here. So we can group scenes rather than breaking them up into lots of different particles. We can do something like this as well. And the same scene on this frame. So we have a lot of scenes, but they're all separated. They don't form groups. And we really need to group them together to make a bigger light shape, because we read scenes in general color shapes. So when the person will look at it, or look at an object, at any objects really, he will see the biggest groups of light and shadow first. And we need to make sure that they are interesting and they are connected. Okay, so we can kind of see it here. So see, again, big group of light, bright yellow. Then it becomes, okay, one group, second group, third group. Then it goes, and this is one group, this is second group, this is group number 3. Then it goes, and this is one group, this is third. Then we go, and this is one group, this is second group, this is third group. Then we go, and then one group, second group, third group, and so on. And if we look here as well, it may seem broken up, but we have one group that is pretty connected. We have second group, we have third group, and we have these two. Again, here, one group, one big group, 2, 3, and this is a big group as well. Again, we go, and in every effect we'll find that usually the values and the colors are grouped rather than being fully separated. Again, this is one group, this is like 2 big group, 3, and so on. And at this point as well, it can be pushed in terms of contrast, but you have like this group and this group. And within group, particles stick a bit closer to each other, and we have a clear sense of separation. So this is like, okay, we can color this all in, and it won't change the composition. We can color this all in, as one scene, it won't change the composition. You can color all this in. And if I choose and even take this without all the fancy details and all the fancy scene and put it here, it will still read as an illuminated smoke. So here we kind of feel that there is a sphere, another sphere, and that it's being illuminated from the top. And here it's kind of like being separated because the sphere cuts into another sphere. Essentially, it's something like this. And so here we don't see anything because this is this part of the sphere. This is this part of the sphere. And then this is illuminated. So this is illuminated parts of the sphere. And these are the shadow parts. So this is the overall structure of it. So the overall structure does not depend on these tiny details. It depends on these big light and shadow shapes. And they can be more tied to actual light. So we imagine, where is the light source in the scene? So for example, so the light source is on the left. So we can create this edge light and do something like this. Or it can be at the top, like in these examples. It can be at the bottom. And all the shapes kind of roughly follow this direction. And then, for example, we can have more abstract designs that don't rely exactly on the lightning, but then they still follow the principle of unity and combining shapes and working in first, thinking about this big light and shadow shapes, and then breaking it up into smaller particles here and there, but still keeping this principle of unity and readability. And I hope this long mumbling was clear, at least in some way. So the same thing here with this kind of splash, the blood splash. It looks pretty nice. So we can push it even more in terms of the design and readability by having more unity in the particles. So right here we go. And you see, we have this lots of trails. We have lots of trails that are quite similar to each other in terms of their position, size, and weights. So we can combine stuff, maybe let some stuff stretch out more, some stuff to combine more. So let's look at good examples of, so we see, okay, nice shapes, stretching out, some smaller, some bigger. They created a big general composition. So here maybe we can try and unify some of the shapes. Okay, so emphasizing the directionality and making sure that everything doesn't stay on the same line. So right here we have like some scenes going out, we have holes here, we have holes here, we have the blood splashing out. So first let's imagine it in space. So we shoot it like this, so we can create this kind of surface that is not actually straight. So this is our splash surface. And then we go, okay, so according to the surface, some blood will fall faster, some blood will go on the curve like this, and due to gravity, it will curve down. So this is how it will probably go in terms of directionality. So now we can emphasize it. Can leaving this as a reference. varying the width here and there. Maybe some of the shapes will go further here, so it doesn't end up on the same level. Some of the shapes will go lower here. Varying the length. And here maybe some scenes go really high up and slow down pretty fast. Get push in the variety between them. So scenes like that. So here, rather than pointing everything in the same direction, and rather than making it all kind of end the same way, we can push the shapes and push the directionality, and then add some extra things here and there. So it kind of makes the scale more clear. But overall, the principle is kind of the same. So hope that helps. Wish you good luck with your animations and let me know if you understood anything from this feedback. Bye bye.